As we turn to this morning's Torah reading, to Parashat Shemini, it's hard not to see certain connections or juxtapositions between the reactions of our community and the world community to the recent passing of Prince Philip and to the Torah readings reactions to the deaths of Nadav and Avihu, especially that of Aaron. Furthermore, when I was discussing the Parsha with my daughter Hannah pointed out a further similarity between Prince Philip and Aaron in that both of them served other people. Aaron, of course, served Moshe, and Prince Philip, of course, served the crown. What's interesting, especially when we look at the Torah reading, though, is how in this particular Torah reading the roles seem to be reversed. Whereas Aaron is supposed to be the spokesperson, the mouthpiece for Moshe, in this Parsha, it's Moshe who does all the talking, and it's Aaron who we see is silent. And of course, when one looks at Prince Philip and his relationship to Queen Elizabeth, it's the queen that's supposed to be doing all the talking, and it's the prince who's supposed to be supporting her. But as we know from having watched Prince Philip over the course of his almost 100 years of life, he wasn't always one to stay silent. He very often had things to say and off the cuff. He lived a very long life, 99 years. And in his passing, therefore, considering his public role, the history of his life, and his relationship to our country as well as to other countries around the world, there is much to say. Prime Minister Trudeau, who's known Prince Philip practically his entire life as a child, of course meeting him when his father was Prime Minister, called Prince Philip a man of great service to the crown, the military, and to philanthropic pursuits. World leaders spoke about him as loyal. That was a word that came up quite often, as a friend, as a person who was duty-bound, and about his impact, especially as the patron or president of more than 800 organizations. Two of the most well-known, of course, are the World Wildlife Fund and the Duke of Edinburgh Award that has helped empower millions of young people from all backgrounds, including here in Canada, to realize their greatest potential as one of just the many examples of his contributions and his impact. As I mentioned, Prince Philip was never shy about what he had to say. The Globe and Mail reported his demeanor could be haughty and impatient, and his tongue could be blistering and intemperate. I found it interesting as a new or renewed resident of Canada. The Globe and Mail showed a graph of the number of times that Prince Philip had been to Canada in an official capacity. It was more than 45 visits, and some of the more memorable off-the-cuff remarks that he had made when he was here. For example, in 1959 tour at a reception the Duke understood as private, he made a remark that the palace was considering replacing large royal tours with small regional visits, musing that the big royal tours had outlived their usefulness. This remark, of course, was quoted in several papers, and they held no more such receptions for the rest of that particular tour. There is another time when he came here to Canada, and he was having a conversation with a group of Francophones speaking French. The prince came and spoke French with us and said, and this particular former leader of the government said, "Your Royal Highness, you speak very good French for an Englishman." To which the prince responded, "I am not an Englishman, and I was speaking French before you were born, young man." And then sometimes, of course, the prince could be funny and very witty. Like immediately following the coronation, it is reported, he turned to the Queen in private, where she was weighted down by all of the royal regalia, and he looked at her with a straight face and said, "Where'd you get that funny hat?" Nevertheless, as has been widely reported, for the rest of his life, he walked dutifully by her side and one pace behind. And although they surely had their ups and downs, as any marriage would have, theirs often in public view, their marriage was known overall to be a happy marriage, lasting more than 73 years. Speaking to the secret of a successful marriage, Prince Philip once quipped, "Tolerance is the one essential ingredient of any happy marriage. You can take it from me," he said, "that the Queen has the quality of tolerance in abundance." As a congregation, we join with our country and other countries around the world in extending our condolences to the Crown and to the family of Queen Elizabeth on the loss of Prince Philip. Hamakom yenechem etchem b'toch sha'ar avelim. May God comfort you among all the mourners around the world. Now, you compare Prince Philip's death after 99 years, his public role, his peaceful transition to the world to come, and the reaction of his family and of the world, with having so much to say about his impact, with the events of this morning's Torah reading, and we see a very different set of circumstances and a very different reaction to loss. In the midst of the festive celebration of the dedication of the Mishkan and the Kohanim, something troubling occurs. The people are celebrating, they're shouting in exaltation, they're witnessing the glory of God, and they're taking pride in the inauguration of the priests and the divine service in the Mishkan and the tabernacle, when suddenly and instantaneously 2 of Aaron's sons, in the midst of their worship, are struck down. Disaster, calamity, havoc. Moses is the first to grasp what happens, and he orders the bodies removed and the service to continue, postponing analysis to later. But there's one thing he cannot postpone. He has to speak to his brother Aaron, the bereaved father of Nadav and Avihu. Now you can read what he says on page 633 and 634 in the Eitz Chaim, and we can talk about what was the cause of this tragedy. What was the cause of their deaths in the midst of the service? And there's lots and lots of commentary written about that, but I want to focus on the dialogue between Moses and Aaron. Moses turns to Aaron and he says, "It is as Adonai meant when God said, 'Bekrovai ekadesh,' through those near to me I shall show myself holy and gain glory between all the people." These are high-sounding theological words. How does Aaron react? The Torah tells us in one word, Vayidom. And he was silent. Aaron was silent. Rabbi Harold Kushner, in his commentary below the line in the Eitz Chaim, offers some ideas on the nature of Aaron's silence. Maybe it's that he accepted God's decree without protest, that his anguish was too great for him to put into words. Or maybe he was tempted to burst out in anger at the unfairness of what had happened to his family and was unable to restrain himself. Abraham Joshua Heschel suggests that our first reaction to death is consternation. We're stunned and distraught. Slowly, our senses of dismay are followed by a sense of mystery. Our speech stops, our understanding fails. In the presence of death, Heschel writes, there's only silence. Vayidom. Psychologists actually worry about that response. Silence in the face of death is not healthy for our well-being. Talking about trauma often is an important means of coping with it. It's really not good for someone who has suffered a loss, especially a tragic loss, to vayidom, to remain silent, to be silent. Those who are participating in our Center for Spiritual Well-Being support groups, the bereavement group and the caregiver support groups, know this to be true. Talking is cathartic. It helps. It's because talking is so beneficial to those who have suffered a loss that often the best thing that we can do, those who wish to provide comfort and support, very often the best thing that we can do is to not talk. Right? Talking for the person who has suffered the loss is important, but for those who are providing comfort and support, sometimes we fumble for the words or we say platitudes. We have nothing more to say than "I'm sorry for your loss," and then we keep talking. And we don't understand that the most important thing that we can do is to be present and to ask questions about the loss so that the mourner can speak. Our job at that moment is to demonstrate active listening. Kushner reminds us of this in his comment that sometimes there are more possibilities and power in silence than in words. Or perhaps, as Andre Neher says, what was behind Aaron's silence is that he was petrified, not only by what had happened, but petrified that his brother Moses would try to explain it away and somehow justify the death of his children Nadav and Avihu. Neher writes that in a book called Exile of the Word. This is the sound of silence that Simon and Garfunkel famously sung about. "Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence." Garfunkel once summed up the song's meaning as the inability of people to communicate with each other, not referring to the inability of people speaking different international languages, but rather on an emotional level, so that what you see around you are people who are unable to love each other. And I think ultimately that's what bothers me most about Aaron's silence. It's not only his silence, but it's Moshe's response to the death. Moshe responds with theological words, and then he continues with the service in the temple. He seems totally inattuned to the suffering that Aaron is going through as his brother, Aaron as a father on the death of his sons. And I can imagine Aaron being petrified by Moshe's response. So he remains silent. And Moshe, the one who originally didn't have the words and was fearful of going to Pharaoh, not knowing what to say, which is why Aaron has to come. See how the roles get reversed? Moshe is the one who keeps talking when it's perhaps Moshe who should remain silent in this moment and provide comfort to his brother Aaron. Sometimes when we turn to the Torah, we learn from the negative example of our ancestors as well as from the positive. And that's a reminder that the heroes in the Torah, our Jewish heroes, they're not superheroes. They're human beings in extraordinary circumstances that sometimes rise to the occasion and do extraordinary things, and at other times respond to the circumstances around them with the same flawed elements that each of us sometimes respond to. So it's been very interesting to me to compare and contrast the death of Prince Philip and the response of a nation and a world to a long life, and a life of meaning and purpose and a legacy that will outlive him and be remembered for years to come, and also to draw an important lesson of how we respond to traumatic loss in our Torah. This moment during COVID, there's a lot of trauma. There's been a lot of loss. But what we should not do is remain silent. What we must do is be present for each other and encourage those who have suffered a loss to speak and to share. And so I just simply want to remind everyone in concluding, that we are here for each other, both formally through our bereavement groups and our support groups, but even more importantly, as a congregational community. The members of the spiritual leadership team are here for you. The members of our lay leadership are here for you. If you want to talk, let us know, and we'll be there to listen. Shabbat Shalom.